Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the final day of Urban Arc. We promise you a really exciting set of papers this morning. The panel is called Gender in the City, Labor, Aspirations, and Marginalities. We have 5 papers, though we are still waiting for one person to join online. We are going to give 10 minutes to every participant and then do a second round if there's something more, but also open it up for questions in the end. So we'll just go in the order of presentations in the booklet. So we'll start with Sandhya, who's from JNU. Sandhya, can you hear us?
Yeah. So my paper title is Researching the Marginalities, Exploring Bazaar as a Site of Pollution, Respectability and Marginality of Women Workers. I have drawn this research paper from my larger research work, PhD research work. I'm working on women workers who work in wholesale vegetable market, popularly known as Bazaar or in Marathi Mandai, which is located in Pune city. I'm shedding light on women's nature of work and gender relations at the workplace. The research is based on ethnographic work. I have conducted in-depth interviews with 88 women workers. The sample selection followed a stratified random sample to ensure diverse representation. So in this paper, I'm focusing on Bazaar, a public space as well as workplace, viewed as how it is viewed as a site for marginalization of women workers belonging to marginalized communities. To understand the marginalization of women workers, one can delve into the process of marginalization through lived experiences, struggles, and negotiations within the bazaar. As we know, marginality is not a static thing, it is a multi-dimensional through spaces, cultural connotations, and unequal gender power relations. Therefore, one cannot limit the context of marginality only to socio-economic exclusion. It should be viewed in terms of spatial context as well. In this paper, present paper, I'm contextualizing Bazaar as a special site of marginality of women workers. So the paper explores the everyday process of marginalization through which women workers remain at the margin and face exclusion and violence. So basically, why looking Bazaar is important. While doing so women often underline that if you have to work here, you have to keep your izzat, large sharam at the gate of the market. It is our majburi that we are working here. So the question of respectability, izzat was central part of the discussion among women workers. Therefore, I thought to explore the nexus between bazaar, not only a public space, but a workplace and the respectability. How does bazaar linked with the respectability, marginality of women workers? When I went into the details of women's narratives, I found that the process of marginalization takes place on various ways, and respectability is one of them. So, as I already said, women who work in the bazaar are seen as bad or not respectable. They are often ridiculed or humiliated by their relatives, co-workers because they work in the bazaar. Women workers often face character assassination from their co-workers, shop owners, and relatives because the space they are sharing, which is bazaar. Similarly, violence from partner is common experience faced by women workers. Their husbands often doubt on them that their wives are indulged in sexual or romantic relationships with other men in the bazaar. So, on above mentioned grounds, women workers face marginalization in the workplace. However, if we delve into the socio-cultural aspects of bazaar, one can make an inference why this happens, why women face humiliation, violence, and push more towards margin. So basically, the bazaar often represented as dirty place with filthy drains, crowded crowds, then noisy lanes, disgusting sellers. Similarly, the term bazaar has always been used in negative connotations as well as in a metaphorical way to represent an outside to ghar. Therefore, women who spend long hours outside the ghar are seen as promiscuous, hence they are often called as bazarubai. opposite to the implicit connection to good housewife. As Dipesh Chakravarti argues that the negative connotation of bazaar is a colonial construct. British, basically this Englishmen viewed bazaar as dirty and disorderly due to the fear of political rebel. Similarly, it was seen as a space for spreading contagious diseases, as the marketplace was seen as a threat to Europeans' health, as many Indians, majorly working classes, collect in a large number. Similarly, the negative connotation has socio-cultural angle of intermixture of castes. So the bazaar has not inhabited by any particular caste or class. Men from marginalized communities, for instance, middlemen, coolies, retail customers, truck drivers, hawkers, from different communities and classes deployed to work in the bazaar. And if women come into contact with them, they would get polluted, and so do their castes too. Thus, to maintain caste purity, control on women's sexuality and access to spaces become a vital task to caste patriarch. Similarly, the sexual solicitation is one of the reasons behind viewing bazaar as a negative connotation, as women easily attract clients. Therefore, women are discouraged from accessing bazaar. When they access it, they face humiliation, violence, and marginalization. So, caste and socio-political and cultural factors play an important role in shaping bazaar as a polluted, impure workplace for respectable women. So, briefly, women's marginal position is not only because of poverty, but their socio-cultural and workplace location, how this location systematically perpetuating inequality to keep them in servitude. Marginality excludes women from livelihood resources, denies them respectability and work with dignity in and outside the workplace. People on the margin remain outside the power structures and are refused to access to power by powerful. Similarly, the core and center does not create opportunities or paths to people on the margin. Instead, it stigmatizes, criminalizes their lives, symbols, objects, and language, as we see in the context of women workers who work in the bazaar. So I think I will stop here, and I can more speak in question answer session.
Okay. Thank you, Sandhya. We'll move on to the next panelist. We have Shraddha from Center for Development Studies.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you for giving this opportunity to present my work here. So, as you can see, the title of my research is about gender norms and bargaining over childcare in urban areas. To put this into the context of the theme of this conference, I'm trying to illustrate that because of their gender and the class, the women belonging to the working class are at margins of the urban imaginary, margins of urban policy making, as it is very generally assumed that family care, child care is taken care in the family. Like that's not something to be thought about. Okay, so we'll get started. So here I'm not presenting any evidence to show that women have been shouldering greater responsibility of childcare. I think we all can please agree on that. And what is the working class? How I am looking at the working class? So these basically involves low income occupations, and I'm focusing only on wage occupations. For the purpose of my thesis, I have not looked at self-employment because there would be overlaps of the workplace and the home. So I just wanted to restrict myself to wage employment, for which women have to go out of their houses. So these are typically occupations which are often called quote unquote unskilled or semi-skilled occupation and require minimal education. So here we ask, like, women who already face constraints in terms of time, how do they negotiate socially assigned care responsibilities and employment? We also explore how gender, class, and other interrelated factors which define constraints or opportunities for women structure the process of bargaining. So just to clarify, this is part of my research project where I also explore that women of different occupation classes, where I look at professional women also, how the process differentiates. Very quickly on the framework for my analysis, this will help us bringing the observations together. So in economics, there is a set of literature on bargaining. So what is basically bargaining? It's simply, to put it simply, it's fallback option when cooperation fails. And cooperation in our case is marriage. So starting for Gary Baker, there has been a whole lot of theoretical game theoretic models on bargaining, but I am drawing from Beena Agarwal's 1997 framework of intra-household bargaining, which is critical of the mainstream game theoretic model. And her analytical descriptions place more emphasis on non-economic and non-tangible factors, more importantly, social norms and households' social locations. So the idea is to focus more on the processual understanding of bargaining, not the factors and the outcomes. I also draw from Kat's work where she mentions about women's lack of voice or exit cooperative situation. Next important framework that I'm drawing from is looking at care as a process. So typically when we think of care, we think of child care in terms of tasks, cleaning the child, bathing, feeding. But this framework allows us to incorporate the mental labor that goes into organizing care as well. I'll quickly spend some time on the fieldwork and the sample description. Basically because I want to emphasize that we are not looking at class just as an economic category based on income, household incomes, or some household expenditure categories, but we want to look them in a more social way and how women's life were organized. So we need to know who were these women. So fieldwork was carried out in NCR in 2018. I used purposive sampling to cover a range of low-income occupation because each employment would have its own specificities. Sample of 74 women range in the age group of 19 to 45. So I didn't restrict myself to women with very young children because I wanted to see how care and care responsibilities change over time. These were the women who were married very early. The average age of marriage of the women in my sample was 16.5 years. So later we'll see how this had a very important implication. More than 50% had 3 or more children. Most of them belonged to other backward classes, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. Very few of them were from the upper caste. And 68% of women earned 9,000 rupees or less. So as I said in the previous slide about the conceptualization of care and how care is seen as a process. So for the respondents in this particular class, they valued school education, which could not be taken for granted for them. So this panel is talking about aspirations. So that is the most important point. So this does not mean that they didn't think about health, nutrition, or safety, but that was very stark to me that what you want to do, how you want to take care of your child. Education was like, we don't want them to work in occupations that we have been working. So that's something very important to note. It was also revealing that more than half of our women in the sample had provided full-time care to their children. In other words, had not taken employment until their children were grown. So I had taken a cut off even a year, like all of them providing full-time care to all their children till 1 year. So that's the highest proportion, 46. And this I tried to look at across migration status. So even women who were born in NCR, that applies. So that tells something about the norms. Interesting group is if you look at the second column, women who provided replacement care were the group who left their infant children into alternate care arrangements. That's a very small group of only 9 women. But these were the women who had migrated to NCR prior to their marriage as single women to take up domestic work. So they were mostly women from Eastern India who had a certain kind of history and networks. So for them, the city and the city life were very different. It was not tied up to movement to their movement to NCR with the family. So their aspirations were formed very differently. So I will start the discussion with the care arrangements, how the decision making around it, and then I'll go back to the life events that had happened prior to it. So what I'm trying to say is bargaining process is over a life course. It's not a one-shot thing that we are not negotiating at the across the tables. It's not like that. So care by family members in the NCR and by the older siblings, we'll come to that in a minute. But I quickly tell you about other care arrangements. Spousal care was the situation when it involved mostly domestic workers who held part-time jobs and their spouses were around when they were at work, and their spouses also had jobs that were entailed shifts, like they were housekeeping staff, so they could take afternoon shift so that child is not left behind alone. Taking children to the work site, typically they were the construction workers whose families worked on the site and everybody could look over the child. Self-adjustment and left alone. So many women had taken up work when children could be left alone, or they were at that age, or they would take up part-time work while the children are in school. So they really didn't need anybody to be around at that point. So now I'll come to a few illustrations about decisions about how family in the NCR was involved. So I take case of Bina, who was a domestic worker. She was born in NCR and worked prior to her marriage. She waited till her children grew up and then her mother was available to take care of the children. None of them were willing to send children to Anganwadis or any other centers like daycares or something. There was no contribution in terms of care from her spouse, and apart from her mother, her older daughter and her brother helped her in the process. Contrary to this case, we have Tina, who was another domestic worker but from Jharkhand. She mostly spoke how she organized care for her infant children, calling cousins, niece, or somebody who has dropped out work from school in village, and there were constantly one person replacing the other. So, and she was not willing to keep the child in the with the neighbors, and she felt it's an unsafe situation child can fall. Preeti was a factory worker from Bihar. She had multiple people involved. That's a very interesting, like we can discuss this case later if we get time. Very interesting case, how multiple people were involved. She came to NCR where her brothers had already migrated few years back. Her older daughter was with the mother in the village. The son was taken care by her sister-in-law and her spouse, who was not employed at the time of the interview. Lalita, a security guard in a university, took paid employment when her children grew. They had sent their younger son to the creche, and she returned by afternoon. So she very well explains that only thing she negotiated with her spouse was, can you please contribute in the task in the morning? Like, I can take care of everything. Can you please just pack the tiffin in the morning or drop the child? So how you have to be asked for. We will get to this later. I just want to say one point about construction sites. Yes, they are precarious sites for children to be kept, but given the context, this was at least an option for the construction workers. So we'll come back to it. Then older siblings at caregivers, we can discuss this later. Basically, these were the vulnerable groups, and older siblings could not attend any schooling, and the spouses were actually indifferent of what's happening around. So there was no participation at all. So basically what I'm trying to say is we categorize participation of men into 4 categories: making contributions, no, asking, without asking. And basically there was actually no participation of men in organizing of care, like what to do if there is any emergency situation. If you ask them, they'll drop the child to school. Okay, I'll pack the tiffin. But that mental load was not shared at all. Just quickly, I won't read all this. I just say that early marriage of women had confined them to household responsibilities early on. So if you are, women said, if I'm married at 16, 17, there's no negotiation happening. I'm kept in the village, and migration decisions are mostly taken by family. When the spouse needs a wife to cook, she will come. When nobody is willing to provide for the extended household, she will come. So the decision making was not very explicit. The women had most implicit expectations. Urban infrastructure I want to focus on here. Like where are the Anganwadis cannot be childcare arrangements of their limited time. We all know what's happening to Rajiv Gandhi National Creche Scheme. Daycares in factories and construction sites, legally they have to be there, but we have stories how fake daycare creches are there in factories. So what we are talking about, it's all marginality. Just one last point. In economic theories, earnings are considered very important for agency, empowerment, and bargaining. But our analysis shows that the earnings for women are themselves determined by gender norms and labor market norms. We can discuss that. Thank you.
Okay, we have Jemini next.
The title of this, it's an ongoing project that we're working on, and the title of this paper is Women at Work, Viewing the City of Ahmedabad from the Perspective of Women Laborers. To give you a context of Ahmedabad, the twin processes of industrialization and urbanization in the city of Ahmedabad, they have reorganized the working and settlement patterns of people living in the city. Ahmedabad, which is divided by Sabarmati River as 2 different parts. The western side of Ahmedabad, it was planned to cater to the needs of the upper and middle class population of the city, whereas the eastern part of Ahmedabad accommodates small-scale industries and houses the low-income working class population. So urban development on the western part of Sabarmati has progressed in different phases, which began from the year of 1930, where the elites in Ahmedabad, they wanted to shift to the west of the city because of the unhygienic, congested nature of the old city in the east. The following years also witnessed the growth of education institutions in the west, which encouraged middle and upper class settlement in the area. And also commercial sites grew as Gandhinagar then became the capital of Gujarat in 1970. In the 1980s, with the decline of textile industries in Ahmedabad and the simultaneous growth of automobiles, pharmaceutical, textile industries on the west, it resulted in a shift of a small number of middle and low-class population to the outskirts of the main city, like areas like Bhopal and Amli, which also attracted migrants to Ahmedabad, affluent migrants from Ahmedabad, because of the industries that were set up. The year 2006 to 2008 also led to the development of the SP Ring Road, which formulated a metropolitan periphery which also accommodated the middle and the upper classes. And this is the map of how Ahmedabad has developed. And this has both eastern and western part of Ahmedabad. However, the study only focuses on the southwestern part of Ahmedabad. Now, this is the southwestern part of Ahmedabad. So among the many industries that grew around Ahmedabad city, one such industry was Sanand. So this industry was, this area was declared as a growth center of Ahmedabad in 1997. And further in 2009, it was called a satellite town. Now, a satellite town is considered to solve the issues of metropolitan city regarding human settlement issues and also absorbing industrial growth. and therefore the areas in close proximity to Sanand, which was especially Shela, Bhopal, and Tilav, and here it is marked in orange lines. So these areas grew and they also boosted in real estate development in the last decade. So tall multi-story buildings, shopping malls, community clubs, malls that spread around the western fringe was supposed to be to make Ahmedabad a world-class city. So this process of building the peripheries in the western part of Ahmedabad created a laboring poor who cater to this middle class and upper class people in the form of domestic laborers, construction workers, street vendors, and waste pickers in the region. Women from the nearby villages of Shela, Telav, and Guma, they worked as domestic workers in the apartments and bungalows of these affluent families. And similarly, migrant women laborers from different parts of India basically came as support to their husbands who worked as construction workers at different sites around Sanand. So, based on an ILO report, more women than men are part of the informal sector, and out of the total working women in India, 82% are in the informal sector. So, in order to characterize informal sector, it's characterized by non-taxed work or self-employment, absence of labor protection laws, and no security, social security. So, while studying the construction workers who had migrated to Ahmedabad, Jairam argues that though these laborers form the backbone in the process of making Ahmedabad a world-class city, they're excluded and discriminated against by being absorbed only as casual and unskilled workers, given low wages along with frequent cases of non-payment and underpayment. As maintained by Jairam, since many of the women migrated to the city as a partner accompanying to the male worker and not as an individual who came to search for work, they were recruited as a couple and their remuneration was given to the male member. So this also devalues the labor. So such practices of exclusion are gender-based challenges that Jairam describes as gendered burdens, which also emanates from traditional norms of being a wife, mother, and worker in the city. To look at theories, the traditional notion of a sexist city, which was reiterated by Jarvis, was rooted in the gendered binary division of the physical spaces in the city, such that spaces of employment were separated from home and spatial segregation of masculine outdoor work and feminine indoor work. While traditional cities translated into gender role confinement, the neoliberal city was believed to be with emancipatory potential. Now, such that it aided both men and women to be employed and hence also provide socio-economic mobility. However, Kern also challenges this by saying the neoliberal city, despite the freedom the women experience through employment, cities are built considering the traditional gender roles and norms associated. Now, the second theory that I'm looking at is scholars in the 1960s have argued that is on the distinct binaries of work-home, and as they are representative of the productive and reproductive labor. To define productive and reproductive labor is defined as producing value in the capitalist context, whereas reproductive labor is the invisible and the unwaged labor such as housework, childbearing, or care work. So, though there have been further contestations on these theories as well. So, with looking at Ahmedabad as the context, using ethnographic methods, account of construction workers and domestic workers are illustrated, and these are some preliminary insights of the project. A common response among the women workers, especially construction workers, was, we have come to the city to work. The primary reason to work was to pay off debt incurred by, for example, their husband's ill health, or debt caused by their marriage expenses, or maybe to financially support a growing family and to earn money to take care of the children. Though they think that they came for work, however, the structural arrangement was such that they came as a secondary partner to their husbands. However, for women laborers, spaces of work were not just confined with waged work, but they also intersected with activities of care, time pass, and experiences of fear. Now, care at work. Now, women construction workers dropped their children to these temporary school settlements that were part of the construction sites, and it was set up by NGOs. These schools also acted as childcare center to take care of children of these migrant workers who worked. Now, women take a break after every hour to either check on their children or to feed them. Around lunchtime, while men spend their time sleeping, women workers would take care of children. Small cradles were tied up on the construction sites in order to cater to this arrangement. Time Pass for the Women. So an ethnographic account of a 24-year-old construction worker from Chhattisgarh unravels how spaces of work are used for time pass activities. Now, she has been working at the site in Shela for 3 months, and her responsibilities at the site include sweeping and cleaning the construction site, transferring materials and water the site. So this allows her to move around the site while working, as she prefers work which allows movement instead of working at the same place. So she enjoys working hard and earning money for her family. Hence, working becomes a part of source of empowerment for her. In between work, break time, she often calls it a time pass. Break time is often considered as a time pass for her, which she engages with her fellow workers and gossips around about other workers from other parts of India, especially Bheels from Gujarat. She uses YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. She enjoys watching funny videos on YouTube, as well as singing and dancing to these songs. However, she does not upload any videos of her on the internet, as she is very worried that people would pass bad comments and stalk her. Watching Kumkum Bhagya, Kundli Bhagya are all part of her pastime activities. Another account of an informant of a 49-year-old domestic worker residing in the village of Shela, and she works in the nearby bungalows near the village. She began as a domestic worker, being very happy as she was working in many of these bungalows. However, with time, she disliked her work as she feels disrespected by the employers and do not get enough time to rest. She was allowed 2 days of leave in a month, but she doesn't even take one, as she worries that once she returns back from her leave, the Mem Sahibs will accumulate all the utensils, which resulted in a tiring job for her. So she dreams of having a job in an office in Ahmedabad city, which is around 12 kilometers from where she resides, as they have fixed working hours, which will give her time to rest. However, she is scared of traveling to these areas, to areas which are beyond Shela village, as it is unfamiliar to her. So according to her, being uneducated has restricted her travel beyond Shela, as she is not confident about using public transport or asking help from strangers in the city. So people in the city are not trustworthy according to her, as the bungalows are built in areas which are part of her village. The familiarity with the spaces gives her the confidence to work at strangers' place. But according to her, it's her village. These Mem Sahibs are outsiders, and therefore they don't have the right to scold her. So therefore, this is the second part of the project which is ongoing, proposes Ahmedabad as a city of work. While the city of Ahmedabad has been a city associated with earning, women laborers perceive the city to be a space of work. So drawing from Kabir, these cities should also be a space which provide the rights, value, and respect to these women workers as a worker in the city. So in order to claim that, what the further part of this project goes is to unravel urban emotions. Now, as emotions are something which is shared among humans irrespective of caste, class, or socio-economic background. Tracing these emotions would unravel questions of their belongings or negotiations in their everyday lives in the city. So, here ends, and some concluding remarks. Urban experiences for women, in Ahmedabad has challenged the binaries of work, home, and productive, reproductive labor, such that experiences of care, time pass, and fear intersect with their workspaces. The future of this project understands emotions of women laborers with these spaces of work, such that they respond to questions of belonging and negotiation in the city. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is Sila online? Yeah. Okay. We next go to Sila, who's from IIT Kanpur.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present my work, which is still a work in progress, and I'm really looking forward to comments, if any. So, the title of the paper goes, Failing the Working Mothers, Are Women Paying the Price of Motherhood in Their Commute? My name is Sila Mishra, and I'm a research scholar. So, what am I doing in this study? So I employ India's first nationally representative time use survey 2019 to unravel the intricate dynamics of commuting for work. And I primarily focus on the head of the household and their spouse who are aged 18 to 65 years and who have spent non-zero time in commute for work. That is, they are employed. So using this, I asked the following questions. within a household, how is commute time for work influenced by gender, and to what extent their spouse involvement in unpaid domestic work and unpaid care work influences one's commute time for work. Now, and if there are any gender differentials in commute time for work, what are the sources? Do we also find the role of social norms here? So these are the questions that I'm looking into in this study. Now, why this study? So, because studies on urban India document a low and stagnant trend of female labor force participation rate and identify both demand side and supply side factors as culprit. So, some studies emphasize that care obligations would be the reason, arguing that women bear disproportionate share of unpaid care work, which might preclude them from labor force participation. In commuting time, most studies about commuting comes from individual level. Examination of commuting time within the household domain is still underexplored, and it is still unclear how time spent on commuting time for work is influenced by their partner's time spent on unpaid care work or unpaid domestic work using nationally representative data set. Moreover, the commute time has been underexplored by considering different contexts like social status, sector of residence, number of children, and gender composition, among others. So, where are my findings fitting in the literature? So, commuting time for work is very complex to model, which involves urban economics, labor economics theory, and feminist economics theories. So studies basically show that there are gender differentials in commute time where women spend less time than men on commute for work. Urban economists see fixed job location. Urban economists find that fixed job location compensated by lower suburban housing prices, while labor economists envision fixed residential location with higher wages for longer commutes. On the other hand, feminist economics critique the assumptions about homogenization of women or homogenization of classes and highlight that the spatial mismatch adversely affect women's labor force participation and women's labor market outcome. So, going by the data set employed in the study, I'm employing India's first nationally representative time use survey 2019, which has gathered information on what people did in the last 24 hours, and by that it classified activities in ICARTAS categories. Now, for the current study, I've just limited my sample to individuals aged 18 to 65 years in India who are employed and have spent non-zero time in commute for work. My sample contains 7,888 males and 5,589 females. The average age is around 41.2 years for men and 42.201 for women. The sample is dominated by the ones residing in rural areas. Now, here we see the graph of commute time for work. In terms of commute time, both gender show variation across age groups. So, for instance, in the early age group, females tend to have longer commute time compared to males. But as the age progresses, this trend becomes less consistent. Now, what is happening in these families where individuals are commuting for work? So here we see the sharing of work in these families. So when we look, so the first graph here shows the involvement in the unpaid domestic work, where we see that females consistently spend more time on such activities compared to males in every age group. But when we look at the unpaid care work, we would see that females dedicating significantly more time in unpaid care work. However, males are also converging around the age of 40 to 50 years. This includes activities such as childcare or time spent taking care of elderly members. This table shows the descriptive stats based on the time use survey. The average commuting time for work of male is around 68 minutes, where it is for female it is around 63 minutes. But if we look at the time spent by male and female in these families on unpaid domestic care, we would find that 75 minutes is spent by male on unpaid care domestic work and 202 minutes by female. There's not much difference in unpaid care work in these families on the time spent. Now, we primarily employ regression analysis where I've used household fixed effects, and I'm focusing on the coefficient of females which is the binary component, and the time spent on unpaid domestic care and unpaid care work by the spouse on the commute time of a particular individual. I've also implied blind row Haka decomposition. Now, in this table, I'm showing the results of regression analysis that incorporates household fixed effects, where I've examined the role of gender, age, usual principal activity status, the spousal involvement in unpaid care work, and unpaid domestic services on commute time. It can be seen that females spend relatively less time on commute for work when we are not considering any type of control and just limited and just used household fixed effect. But the moment I include controls for age, usual principal activity status code, and the time spent by the spouse in unpaid care work and domestic work, females are found to be spending more time than males on commute for work. We also find the role of the spousal's involvement in unpaid care work and domestic care, where if the spouse involvement in unpaid care work increases, then the time spent on commute for work also increases. It is also in line with unpaid domestic care, where with each increase in the with each addition in the unpaid domestic work, the time spent on commute for work increases. Sure. In the next table, I've limited the sample to one child, two children, three children, more than three children, and the houses where the children are male dominated and female dominated. So when we see the houses where more than three children are there, females spend 12.53 minutes more than males on commute for work. In all the cases, we find that the spouse involvement in unpaid care work increases. As it increases, the time spent on commute for work also increases. The same holds true for unpaid domestic care when there are just two children in the family. But it doesn't hold significance in the case of one child, three child, and more than three child. Now, I've also performed blind row Haka decomposition technique to understand what is the we have found that there is a gender gap in commute time for work. So what actually accounts for that? So the difference between male and female commute time for work is around 7 minutes, and it is majorly explained by coefficient which shows the unobserved part. Okay, so going to the final conclusion from the analysis, we find that the study underscores the importance of considering shared responsibilities and understanding commute dynamics. And we shed light on the intersectionality of gender roles and family commitments. We find that reversing the sexual division of labor within the household would narrow down the sex work differentials. Moreover, the employment of blind row Haka decomposition technique unveiled that the gender gap is primarily on account of social norms. So thank you for being patient, and I'm really looking forward to comments, if any. Thank you.
Thanks, Sila. We now have Saili and Sinu from Savitribai Phule Pune University.
Can I get the... Hello, I'm Saili and I have with me Sinu. We are researchers at Department of Women and Gender Studies, Savitribai Phule Pune University. So I'll just start. In this paper, we attempt to unpack how the subjectivities of women students get shaped through aspirations, classroom experiences, campus life, and friendships within the space of higher education. This paper emerges from our experience of working as research assistants for a collaborative research project, a research study to further gender equality in higher education by the Department of Women and Gender Studies, Savitribai Phule Pune University and Brunel University, London. While the research study looked to further gender equality in higher education by trying to address gender disparities generated by the intersections of language, caste, class, ethnicity, religion, disability, and sexual orientation, for the purpose of this paper, we deliberate upon the question of gendered subjectivities in the context of rapidly expanding landscape of higher education. Contemporary landscape of higher education is witnessing unprecedented expansion and increased gender parity, while at the same time a decline in work opportunities for women in time of jobless growth. To delve further into subjectivities, we move beyond the question of access and ask what happens to women students once they enter the space of higher education and how hierarchies and marginalities get reproduced and operationalized in different ways. By foregrounding the paradox of women's women's empowerment and its celebratory discourse, we analyzed the data from 2 states, Kerala and Jharkhand, and 4 partner institutes, 2 in each state. For this presentation, we are focusing on the state of Kerala and 2 institutes within Kerala. This is a multi-sited mixed method research project rooted in feminist research methodology. Our research revolved around linkages between education and its translation into employability, students' interaction with the campus space, and factors enabling marginalized students to continue higher education. In this paper, we delve into questions of students' aspirations, sense of belonging to the campus, and their everyday lived experiences. We arrived at the question of gendered subjectivities, not merely to address it as an emerging theme, but to foreground our own engagement with the research beyond its completion. This is a post-project engagement where we, as researchers working on the project, choose to revisit our data to explore gendered subjectivities and other interlocking thematic areas. For this presentation, we are focusing on the 2 institutions in Kerala, Missionary College and public universities. Pseudonyms have been used for college, university, and participants' names. We have put up our research questions on the slide, so we won't be able to read it out. I hand over the next thematic presentation to Sinu, who is going to look at the theme of aspirations.
Thank you, Saili. So I'll be covering the first theme, which is aspirations. Is higher education a passport to the future or a driving license? Aspiration is largely associated with career and profession. Little did we know that during this fieldwork, we'll come across varied interpretations of aspiration in higher education. It is not always translation of education into material form that matters. What also matters is the everyday experiences, transactions that get unnoticed in the space of higher education. It is about everyday experiences and transactions that get unnoticed. It is about the freedom, autonomy, shaping, and maneuvering of the everyday that doesn't get mentioned when we talk about aspirations. Women coming from different social backgrounds is not just limited to matters of aims, goals, or aspirations, but it is also about their introduction to the world of freedom, and the medium for this is the degree that they are pursuing, wherein students have claimed to have developed an individual identity due to varied kinds of exposure that HE offers. This research project was not just limited to interviewing female students, it has also included policy makers and non-teaching staffs of these institutes. The insights we got through this process was diverse, and that made us look at aspirations from beginners' perspective who were stepping into work and those who were already working and what the space of HE meant to them. Through this paper, we look at dreams and aspirations of women and how their subjectivities affect their choices. Now we try to examine the factors that contribute to aspirations. These factors are a cluster of parental and societal expectations in a very gendered and stratified way. The switch to higher education is not an easy transition. It is rather subjective in nature, as HE is a place of diversity. In this context, we look at an excerpt from Neeta's interview, which is displayed on the screen, who is from public university. Neeta was a petite and timid tribal girl and a daughter of a single mother. She was accompanied by her friend for the interview. She was nervous before the interview and wasn't letting go of her friend's hand as she had to face the interview all alone. As the interview progressed, this timid little girl turned out to be very determined and focused about her education. She met with an accident and was instructed by the doctors to take a year's break, but she continued studying with a broken back as she did not want to waste a year. For some students, it is a natural progression to get educated and finding a job. For some, the struggle becomes more personally driven by their own socio-political location. Neeta did not have the courage to take up the course of Bachelor of Veterinary Science and chose sociology. The quote is displayed on the PPT, and wherein she speaks about not having the courage to become a doctor. For Neeta, could have explored the opportunity of being a doctor, but for the inhibitions, and also no one in their community had taken up this profession. There was reluctance by her and her mother to take up this profession. This came up in the later part of the interview. So making a career choice is not driven by merit alone, but also about the socio-political and economic status of these students. Not having the courage to become a doctor is a lived reality for many students. The formal teaching, the kind of training these young women that limits their aspirations under the pretext of patriarchal formation, thus the sense of aspiration for marginalized students is different in comparison to non-marginalized students. We deliberate further into the determinants of aspiration aspirations through policy interviews as well. When the institutional stakeholders talk about encouraging women students, it includes direct correlation between women's education and career. During one of the policy interviews in Kerala, this correlation was very evidently established by Sebastian, who was an IQAC coordinator in Missionary College. This interview was very insightful for us. He gave us an insider's perspective about Kerala, educational state of affairs in Kerala, and his critical opinion about NEP. He expressed his views on the importance of work for female students. He quoted, the quote is displayed on the screen, and wherein there is some sort of he establishes, of course, the direct correlation between work and career. He mentions that women's life is not just limited to kitchen, but can we ignore women's engagement in domestic responsibilities? Evidence of this was witnessed during COVID times. Many research scholars pursuing PhD were worried about their course completion and not able to complete their research work, which with added pressure of marriage and job guarantee. This direct correlation between women's education and career is not as simple as it appears. It is more intrinsic in nature. Not having the courage is not individualistic in nature. At the same time, it is more of a structural issue. This structure is governed by the overall functionality of our society, be it the social norms or the field women select, or a certain category of students can only choose to become doctors. It is the subjectivities of the female students operating at multiple levels that has to be taken into account when we explore their aspirations in higher education. Now I hand over the rest of the presentation to Saili.
So the next theme that I want to focus on is aspirations for more, friendships, romance, freedom. We meet Rubina on the campus of Public University. Even before we meet, we are told by the faculty and students alike that hers is an inspirational story and we should talk to her. Although initially she appeared to be extremely nervous and soft-spoken, yet through her interview she communicates everything that the campus has offered to her in terms of being able to move freely through the campus late at night, being able to articulate her thoughts. Initially she was hesitant whether she would be able to communicate with us in English, but when she completes the interview, she leaves with a sense of accomplishment of having been able to give the entire interview in English and express herself. Rubina's interview informs us of what the higher education as a place can mean in terms of aspirations for more than education, more than just attaining a degree. One of the key factors she points out that keeps her motivated is support from her friends. She mentions hesitance in joining the course and her friends stating that since classes are online, she would be able to manage her time in a better capacity. This small sort of reassurance sort of helps her continue her engagement with the course. Rubina's is but one of the many stories we heard while interviewing women students on campus. Our observations while conducting the interviews with these students compel us to believe that being a part of the university is not just a fraught terrain in terms of negotiating multiple factors of family rules and regulations or institutional limitations. But yet we find women students find different ways where they are able to transgress. We find there is a constant urge to acquire. There is another theme that we look at here is certain respectable good woman behavior, where women students, while work extra hard in earning good grades or travel long distance to come to the university or engage in multiple co-curricular activities. Being a model student at the university helps them attain the respectability of their peers, their teachers, their parents, their communities, and hence the justification of why they are pursuing the higher education. By accepting the role of good, respectable women, these students are able to push the boundaries that seem to be pre-decided for them. One of such instances has been speaking to another student from Kerala who is extremely ambitious, wants to pursue higher education outside India, is involved in multiple co-curricular activities. She's a model student who has achieved the respectable good woman status. The transgression then comes up in the context of this model student getting a haircut which does not go with the traditional image of a Kerala woman. The interview excerpt highlights Tina's willingness to go through the scrutiny of getting her haircut. She makes sense of this by juxtaposing her achievements and engagement in extracurricular activities as a way of negotiating a haircut or trying a different look. We see a similarity of experiences in Rubina's conversation as well, where she agrees to whatever her family chooses for her in earlier years of her life. In her agreement to their wishes, she finds herself in an abusive relationship, and as her divorce finalizes, her freedom to make a choice for herself in all aspects of her life becomes clear. She not only participates in campus-wide activities, but also initiates her active political engagement. I'll just conclude in a minute. So by focusing on these fraught, contested, constantly negotiated lived experiences, we sought to understand the ways in which students carve out spaces to aspire, dream, transgress, and conform simultaneously. These spaces give students a chance to escape and move into a world that offers something different, where they are able to critique institutional structures, but also feel a sense of belonging to these spaces, which include not just their big, small moments of triumph, but their mundane, everyday experiences as well. This is a space that nurtures their desires, autonomy, dangers, possibilities, aspirations, while shaping their sense of self. This failing to do so in times where students' aspirational mobilities are crystallized through educational projects would do disservice to their lived realities. This subjective experience can be further understood when we look at the ways in which students put faith in institutions amidst their fraught experiences of belongingness. The institutes at once become the substitute for family and sometimes more, for it offers which familial spaces cannot, a bleak opportunity to transgress and experience different forms of experiences within the space of higher education. This also contributes to the shaping of their gendered subjectivities in a space where one is granted entry to attain a formal degree, but transitions into a being who aspires for more, for freedom, friendships, romance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. I think we are more or less on time, right? Okay, so I just have a quick one round of questions, and perhaps you can use that also as an opportunity to tell us things you may have left out on your presentation. I know Shraddha had a bit. So we'll just do one round and then open it up for questions. Sandhya, if I could start with you. Could you describe, I mean, you told us about the politics of the bazaar, but I didn't quite get a hold of what is it that this bazaar sells, or, you know, what is the kind of things that are being, or where is it located? Is there a certain historicity to the place because of which there is such kind of gender taboo around this work? So if you could clarify that a little bit to us, because that wasn't quite clear in the presentation. For both Shraddha and Jemini, you know, it's really interesting that you sort of separate both the productive and the reproductive work, while also saying that one sort of carries forward to the other. But have you thought about how, especially when the child is really young, because both of you talked about that as well, productive work in some sense is a form of social reproduction as well. You're forced to get back into the labor force because you have to sort of sustain the family. You know, so it's not that clean in that sense, that both productive work and reproductive work are actually sort of overlapping economically, not just in terms of tasks. The simultaneously of tasks is one thing, but the fact that they're also sort of, you know, going in, and because of the lack of infrastructure that you mentioned. Sila, I'm just really curious, is there anything on employment with reference to this commuting time that you're talking? Because it's not quite clear they are, you know, reducing or increasing commuting for what? Like you said, work, but is there anything about the type of work or the nature of work or wages? I mean, I think that will really help us to contextualize this a little bit more. I honestly don't have a question for you guys. I'm still processing much of what you said, but I'll leave the floor open and we'll come back later.
Yeah. So the bazaar here, am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So the bazaar here, I'm talking, it's about the wholesale vegetable market, which is located in Pune city. And it's a central wholesale vegetable market. And basically the history itself, as I underlined, it's embedded in coloniality, as Dipesh Chakravarti argues that, you know, the negative connotation of the bazaar places, it comes from the British Englishmen, how they viewed bazaar as a site of filthy lanes or dirty places. And also there is a very interesting work by Rodrich, who brings the socio-cultural aspects about the bazaar, where he underlines the intermixtures of caste. So these are and the third, where we draw the negative connotation about bazaar from Swati Shaha's work, where she underlines the street corners, and I applied her framework in bazaar, where the sexual solicitation becomes, the aspect to view bazaar women as, less respectable or not a good woman. So, yeah.
Thank you. If I can just quickly respond to that. So, I understand you're using other references to talk about it, but you said you did ethnographic work. If you can reflect from your own work in how this is playing out on the field. I mean, I get the larger context and the literature around it and coloniality and all of that. But from your own ethnographic work, if you could give us a little bit of, some examples to suggest how this is playing out on the field.
Yes. So when I started presenting my work, I quoted women's, where women talked about this is not a good place to work for respectable women. So the question of respectability started from there, and then in one interview, a woman said, whenever I go to my village, and start talking with or arguing with my relatives, they often said, "Oh, don't talk with her or don't mess with her. She is a bazaar woman." No, that's kind of experience women often experience from there, or they get humiliated or ridiculed by their relatives. So these kind of experiences women face on their everyday lives. Then they face violence from husbands. These are the more or less, observations, and it came from their interviews.
Okay, I have a follow-up question, but I'll just wait around to get back to that.
Thank you, Divya. If I understand your question correctly, you are trying to say that how employment was also necessary for making sure social reproduction takes place. So yeah, that is definitely, I didn't spend too much time on highlighting the economic compulsion. So we have examples like construction workers saying that even a 1-month-old child is taken to the construction site and the leg is tied to the tree. A factory worker said, when I asked her about the education profile of her children, she said, I didn't send my older daughter to school for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. What will I do of education if there's nothing to eat in the house? So yes, those boundaries of productive and social reproductiveness always keep merging, and that's very stark when we see older siblings playing the role of a caregiver. Also, I very quickly ended on that, because of the casual nature of their employment, it were women who would give up on their days, like they were daily wage earners. The construction workers were also, when there was enormous workload. Like for example, one construction worker said that after every 7-8 days, she'll take a day off. She has 4 sons and there will be a pile of clothes to be washed. So I am the one who is taking off. So in that sense, her monthly income will always be lesser than her spouse. So conventionally, when we talk about income can give more bargaining power. So how your incomes are, that returns from productive space are also determined by your social reproductive roles. So if I could convey.
I think what I was trying to get at is, this distinction that you were making between productive and reproductive tasks. But I'm saying that perhaps the economics of it compels that kind of blurring of boundaries. So it's not perhaps that separate.
Yeah, yes.
In that sense, right? Like, because one is sort of both in terms of just the fact that you're doing multiplicity of tasks, but it's also the economics of why you need to do the multiplicity of tasks.
And that was, just to quickly respond, that was the point I said earlier, that I chose the sample that way, that I want to look at wage employment. Like many people do research on self-employment and home-based work. There is furthermore complexity of this distinction. So yeah, something to elaborate on. I'll take note of. Thank you.
So yes, it is. The distinction is not it's not like as distinct as it looks like, and one such incident that I remember is one of the construction worker mentioning that I have come to this city only because after I had children is only when I came to the city, because I cannot the expenses of my children, I don't want my in-laws to take the expenses of my children, and hence I migrated to this place. So the entire motivation for her to migrate was the idea that she had to feed her children. And even while at the construction site, these spaces of schools that are set up in the labor colonies also act as spaces of social reproduction, as these women do not have to worry about their children. So while they work, they can also come back and go back and forth and look at the children or check their children. So these spaces of social reproduction or production, they're not as distinct, but of course it blurs with the evidence that comes from the field as well.
Sila, if you want to respond quickly.
Yeah, thank you. So, thank you, Diva, for that question clarifying the data. So, I've employed. So I'm really looking at the sample where the individuals have spent some time in commute for work, which is basically commute for work and employment, and it's coded as activity 181, employment related travel. Moreover, in my sample, I've just limited to those individuals who have spent, whose usual principal activity status code is either self-employed, employer, or worked as helper in household enterprise, or worked as regular salaried employees, and also those who have worked as casual wage laborer. So this is the case in my data set.
And is there anything on wages and the implications of that because of this commute time?
So I would have to corroborate time use survey with PLFS, because TUS doesn't provide information on your wage. It has information on your usual consumption expenditure. However, it doesn't provide any information on wage. So I'd have to corroborate it with the PLFS.
Oh, that's fine. It wasn't meant to push you, but I was just wondering if you found some secret,
No, just
variable in the data set that we're all looking for. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Open the floor for questions.
Hi, I'm Pranjali, and I have a question for Shraddha. First of all, and a very interesting presentation and field work. Briefing it out, was there any agency of the women who were chosen for this research? Was there any agency for them regarding the capital they earn? Like if there were negotiations in terms of care work with their partners or other people related to them? Was there any agency of the women regarding the capital they earned in terms of the work they did with reference to, as you mentioned, that there were negotiations in terms of care work? So ultimately, like, was there any agency provided to them, or they had when they brought that money from the work they did? That's all. Thank you.
So I have a question for, I've got two questions, one for Sila. So have you used any, you said that you used the blinder or Kana method, right? Did you do any kind of like mixed method analysis also, like took some, interviews or like another like small survey to kind of supplement this? Because actually there is another study, I don't know if you've read the study by Melissa Gilbert. She has done something very similar, but she used mixed methods. And she kind of sees, so this study is done in the US, she kind of looks at poor working women, but she then realizes there's a racial and class stratification between these women, and that, that spatial entrapment theory, which I think you also kind of maybe referred to slightly, how it works for women, but also, against them. So it kind of gives more like kind of a nuanced outcome. I don't know, like, have you done any kind of like mixed method analysis? That was like one of my first questions. Sorry, I don't mean to like this thing, but you just went through the methods really fast, which is why I'm asking. The second question is for Shraddha. I read some of the excerpts that you had, and I was just wondering, were there like, it almost seems like these women are kind of powerless to negotiate almost. Like it seems like their spouses are quite apathetic, at least from, your excerpts. Slightly biased opinion from myself. But yeah, could you speak a little more about like the negotiation strategies and maybe some outcomes of those?
Hi. So I wanted to ask a question to Sayali and Sinu. Thank you very much for that paper. It was really, really also thinking about the question of the university like we were talking about yesterday, and this idea of not just seeing the outcome, but just the fact of being there, right? And actually, afterwards we were leaving and one of our students was saying how he was the first generation student where none of the rest of his community or family followed. So it didn't have that ripple effect. But he kept insisting actually that it gave him something outside wage, right? But so it's really nice to see sort of a thickness of this archive of what that is so we can begin to hold on to it. But so what I wanted to ask you guys actually is to think a little bit just out loud on what we do with this, because there's now a lot of interesting research coming on this question of belonging in the university, right? And I think it's coming because universities now have this generational shift we were talking about. But a lot of the work that I've read on this seems to suggest that belonging always happens despite the university, despite the administrative thing, despite the thing. You know, it's like there is all this crap, but still somehow in the corridors and in the buses and in the hostels and in that one meeting, there is this moment that gives it to you, right? So I just wanted you guys to think out loud, when we take this research and think about practice, how do we not let this be despite, but actually be slightly intentional? Like what is it that triggers belonging versus hinders it? Is it, a lot of what you're saying is not in the control of either a faculty or these are these informal but is there a way in which one can anticipate them and support them? And so what happens to say that, can we give belonging more of a chance in our universities, right? This is also on my mind a lot because this is the week in which there are events marking Rohit Vemula all over the country. So I'm also thinking about this possibility of belonging you're giving me and against this deep dehumanization we also know about. But you're absolutely right that the university is both. It is this dream space and it's this violently awful space at the same time. So, but just, you know what I mean? Some thoughts of saying, well, what does that give us? Can we begin to understand why some of your respondents got to this experience? And can it be a little more directed and not so random or lucky, Thanks for the work.
Hi, I have a question. Anyone working on informal workers could respond on the panel. So I was just wondering if there were any narratives on relational autonomy by these workers, because people who are working informally, they don't have a fixed schedule a lot of times, and for women especially, it could provide them with a sense of relational freedom and autonomy over their work. Again, I'm not naturalizing women's work, domestic work, or I'm not understanding freedom from a liberal conception of it, but how if there were any narratives that came out of it. Also on questions of aspirations, when we ask questions on aspirations in labor, we kind of get responses regarding labor as well. But when I was talking to some sanitation workers in Patna, and when I asked about their aspirations, they said, I'm working, I'm eating, I'm living, we don't have problem with these precarious labor and all. We just want a toilet because women workers have to go to local police stations for using toilets and they were harassed there. So how do you see these heterogeneities of aspirations within the community itself? Thank you.
Okay, if we could respond to that and maybe...
Can I ask a question? Am I audible?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Hi.
Maybe the last question we'll respond, and if there are more, we can pick it up.
Yeah, I would maybe just... I'm from Kerala, so this was very interesting for me, your presentation. I had this question about whether you encountered women, maybe, who were sent to colleges with the exact idea that you will be married off right after this. This is a degree for you to be a marriable person in the matrimonial market. Because I did have classmates who said that I'm not going to invest any more time in studying because I will be married off right after this. I'm here to enjoy the time, the last leg of freedom that we have. That was one. And I also wanted to just give a little anecdote that I'm outside Kerala right now studying. So I had 3 different Malayali women who, before going home for their vacations, would shave off their hair because they did not want to get marriage proposals coming at that time. That was their way of negotiating going back home for vacation, just the vacations. At the same time, if you get a haircut, and in Kerala, I have my own experience and other friends' experience. If you ask the haircut for the haircut to be a little too short, they'll ask, "Are you sure? Is that okay? Can you go back home after that?" So there is a certain kind of thing that pushback that comes from people. By the way, the hairdressers might not even be from Kerala, but they know what Kerala is in that sense. Just wanted to let you know that, and thank you for your presentation.
Okay, perhaps we respond to that.
Yeah, thank you for all those questions. Starting with your question on financial decision making. So yes, I had those questions and didn't present them here. So firstly, most of them were meeting ends. So it was not so much of capital as we understand capital in a conventional sense. And there were varied kind of ways how financial decisions were made. Also, most of them, when I interviewed them, were what we called nuclear families. So it was more of inter-spousal negotiations. So it's also interesting to see how this was also a women task to manage the house. So whatever earning is there, you spend, like she had to, what we call, budget the house. So that was her realm. Nobody intervened in them. But there were layers to it if she was the single earner of the families. And there were also cases, especially domestic workers. They will report, okay, I will only report that I have 3 jobs. I don't have 4th job. So that's the money I am using. Construction workers, as she also said, income is given to the man. But man they will readily give the money to the women to run the house, so that they don't have to do most of the management. So that's the first response. To Rajini's question on women being powerless. So I'm sorry if I can't go back to one of the narratives. Which will partly answer the other question on autonomy also. So what I'm trying to say, see, my work is around negotiation over childcare. So what I'm trying to say is childcare remains non-negotiable. If I can convince you on that. Okay, there is a whole lot of negotiation happening on taking a paid work at some time. Okay, I will go. Now we need money, we can't survive. That is a level of certain negotiation as far as women can manage the housework and childcare on their own. Because in the cities they would say, like, we have to provide for rent. We had sessions on rent. We had session on physical infrastructure. We have to pay, even paying for water, which we, the privileged class, pay very minimal, but they pay a lot for water. So these things have to be provided. There a lot of negotiation goes into the employment part of it. I am taking work. So there is a trusting narrative from a factory worker in Noida. She said, that I'm married for 14 years. My spouse is not bothered about the household at all. He keeps questioning my employment. He's ready to hit me. So he was then, if I shout, he'll do something. But that does not affect me. I am taking care, I am earning, and I am taking care of my family. I can manage. Even if he decides to run away, I can manage. So these are also various forms of autonomy. Like, it's not only like, okay, so that's the very point I'm trying to bargaining. It's not a simple negotiation happening. It's also how subtle ways you find your own ways to get along. There are women who could say, they were happy at least, okay, my spouse is doing something in the morning. I'm able to get out of the house on time because factory gates will be closed. So that I don't know if the presentation didn't give so much information on how those subtle strategies were, but for the childcare, that was actually non-negotiation. So if I responded to, and if that helps to respond to your question too. Just quickly on aspirations. When we talk about aspiration, it's also important how we ask questions. Like all studies would look at aspirations in a very different way. Studies looking at women's employment will look at aspirations in a different way. Urban planning in general would look at. So these points were not missing, that we have to go in open for toilets, or there are no nearby schools around. But for me, what was major takeaway was that constant repetition, we want to educate our children. And here they are not even talking about quality education. They are saying sending them even to free government education was a challenge. So that's why how I looked at aspirations.
So responding to the question on autonomy, so I don't look at autonomy, if I have to speak from the perspective of the women laborers, especially construction workers and domestic workers. I think it will be different for both of them. So I wouldn't look at autonomy in the sense like they have the freedom to do whatever they want to do, because of course, like when it comes to a domestic worker, so she would be bound within the routine of going to these number of bungalows in one particular day. She has to spend these. So for her, it would be like, kaise main khatam karu? She wants to finish off that work because by the end of the day, she is very tired. But what something that also came up during my fieldwork was also that like it's a very tiring job for these domestic workers. So if at all, and they cannot even take leaves or things like that. So if at all they just want to be like, these everyday acts of autonomy, if I should say, or just everyday acts of like protest, it would be like, theek hai, salary mila, I will not go the next day, So things like that, because the employers are not empathetic to their situation. So and they cannot speak back. So what they do is like these everyday acts of, autonomy in that sense. And for example, if I talk about a construction worker, so for them, though the evidence did say that they have time for everything. They could go check on their children. They could just roam around for some time. All of that. However, and they would also say that the supervisors wouldn't say anything to them, right? However, I also feel that they are under a structural arrangement where though they would feel that they have the freedom to do a lot of things, they would be bound by a lot of these capitalist structural arrangement that they are in. So not complete autonomy, but everyday acts of autonomy is what I would say. To the question on aspirations, again, like for a domestic worker, the aspiration for her, the aspiration was to just get done. I mean, I just don't want to do this work, but rather work in offices in the city, because now currently she's in the outskirts. She's like, I want to go to the city and work, but for her, even that is a hard task for her, because she's scared to go beyond the limits of that city. So for her, the aspiration just remains that, okay, I want to go there only because she can get rest. Now she's not getting rest from her everyday jobs. So she's like, okay, if I go to the city, there is a fixed hour of work that I have to do, and then there will be fixed hours of rest as well that I'll get. But which currently she doesn't get. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Sila, if you want to respond to the question.
So thank you so much for that question on the methodology. So in the current study, I've not employed any mixed method, which is and I've just employed India's time use survey 2019. Moreover, how Blinder-Oaxaca decomposition technique method function. So you have commute time gap, and then it is decomposed into gap on account of gender differences in commute and in commute characteristics. and the unexplained component, which Ashwin, as Ashwin Deshpande states, that it could be due to gender differences in the labor market return to characteristics, also called social norms. So I've employed just two quantitative, just a quantitative technique which can explain whether the gap is on account of unexplained component, maybe or the explained components. In our study, we find that the gap is on account of social norms as well. So yeah, thank you. And moreover, I would like to get back to you on the literature that you mentioned, and because I have not read that, so I'll get back to you on that literature. Thank you.
Okay, Shraddha, you had a question for somebody here? Yeah, then we can pick it up.
Thank you. I have two quick questions, one for Sandhya and one for Sayali. For Sandhya, I have thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. I'm just curious to know how were the relations among women in the bazaar? Like how were they competitive, or were there solidarities? And to Sayali and Shinu, I was just curious to know, in the institutes that were chosen, were there any differences along, were they all co-education institutes or only women institutes? So that was it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Saili and Sinu, and then we'll come to you, Sandhya.
Okay, thank you for all the questions and comments. I'll start with the first question and comment about belongingness. So I'll start by drawing an excerpt from the interview itself. So the IQAC coordinator that we spoke to, Sebastian, so he mentions that caste in the college, caste and tribe as a category in the college only exists in the context of admission category. And beyond that, they do not see caste or tribe as existing within the space of this missionary college. When we spoke to Neeta, the tribal girl, she says that their identity is, their caste or tribal identity is something which they travel with throughout their journey within the space of higher education. She gave an example of how even for considering, they don't even get considered for extracurricular activities because they are not so-called good students, and only good students who get good marks are the ones who are asked to do or are taken into considerations for being a part of those extracurricular activities. So basically what we are trying to get at here is higher education as a space has this imagination of standard student, and then who is this standard student, and do then higher education as a space shows affection to all students who come within that space, or do they show affection to only certain kinds of students, and then the certain kind of students are shown disaffection by erasing their identities or by considering them as uniform students, right? So that is something that I think, and also also when we think of gender as a category of analysis, we also think in terms of reflexivity. So then when we also come into the space of higher education, are we being reflexive of our privileges of being able to communicate in a certain language, being able to understand dense theories and communicate in them, whereas when we have first generation learners very far and few in between who are still struggling with the issues of languages and making just through that degree, just retaining their existence in that space of that ephemeral space of higher education. So that is something. So, and in terms of practice, then what we also did through our project is gender sensitization programs. So in these programs, our basic aim was to, if nothing, to operationalize or make sense of the definition of the term equality. How do we make sense of equality, and how do we make sense of gender equality? So then I was speaking to somebody and they asked, so how do you see gender? Do you see it in binary or at a spectrum? So what I responded was, then we see gender as a category of analysis at the intersections of then caste, class, religion, region. We are all moving in spaces. We may not be Savarna or Dalit or tribal at every moment in time, but it is in the relationality and context that are or a woman or a non-binary that our identities also change. So institutional structures need to be sensitized towards these diversity, and again diversity becomes an abusive word now because diversity, that means everything in just one category, but rather than putting everything in one category, sort of understanding the nuances of what we were trying to do through these gender sensitization workshops that we conducted while we did our project, our action research project that was a part of this 2 years project. I'll let Sinu take the question of the compulsory nature of marriage, because we have also had an interesting thematic that emerges through our paper as well. In terms of we went to 10 institutes in 5 states. There was Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, and Maharashtra. And am I missing anything? No, right? 5 states covered. Rajasthan, yeah. And there were few only women's colleges, but there were public universities and private universities where there were co-ed spaces. So two were only women's colleges and 8 were co-ed university spaces in colleges. These are the, what we spoke about in terms of aspirations, in terms of compulsory nature of marriage, in terms of, the caste and caste dynamics. So those were pretty much the common thematics that we sort of draw from it. Like, for instance, friendships became a site on which almost everyone spoke about how their friends sort of helped them sustain that period within the university spaces. So we were really curious about these friendships, right? I mean, there are no material supports. We can understand if somebody is talking about their grandfather, grandmother, or the familial or the community. But what do these friendships mean where there is no material gain coming out of it? So we sort of tried to make sense of it by understanding that, okay, so there are your experiences like that, I'm also going through the same kind, something similar but different. So they sort of become co-travelers in their stories when they are present in the space of higher education. Even though it's ephemeral, but still that for that period of time, there is that sense of transgression, exploring their own reality and identity and sexuality. So that gives them the space. So friendship was one of those affect that came out of this interviews. So, if you want to.
Thanks, Minu, for your question. And I hope I'm taking your name right, because I remember your name because we have similar names. Okay, so marriage was always in the background for all the interviews that we had taken. But at the same time, you will notice that it's not just marriage driven that was happening throughout the interviews. There was also these girls were like very determined, whether it was whether a girl from tribal background, whether non-tribal, marginalized, Hindu, middle class, they were all driven very much by the aspirations. Some aspire to go outside of India, but they all were driven by aspirations. Marriage was not necessarily the end goal, but at the same time, what I observed was that there was a time limit to this aspiration. At the same time, there was that okay, till the age of 24, 25, you can do whatever you want, but after that, you have to get married. But at the same time, there was this a lot of restrictions in spite of Kerala being one of the most literate state. But at the same time, what we observe is that when it comes to respectability of women, the maintaining that ideal femininity was always there throughout. But at the same time, we noticed the changes in terms of this one of the FGDs that we came across in the missionary college, wherein a girl spoke about having expressed the fact that she doesn't want to get married ever, and her parents were okay with it. At the same time, you can see those changes at the same time, but not at a very large level, so to speak. But yeah, that's the thing. That's always there. And when it comes to ideal femininity, respectability, when you spoke about cutting the hair and everything, yes, it's considered. I mean, the way Kerala is advertised in general, whether it is tourism or however, it's always the setisari, the curly hair or the long hair or the kuri on the forehead. It's always advertised in that way, and that exists. And when Saili was talking about the gender sensitization program that we attended, wherein we were giving these workshops, which was part of our action research project, which happened later towards the end of the research project. So when we were talking about gender, it's binaries, and it was like what was for them a feminine woman, they pointed out towards me because I was dressed in a certain way, and that is always there in the background, that you consider that this person is dressed in a certain way, who has this type of hair, that is considered as an ideal person there. At the same time, all these restrictions, yes, it's there in terms of accessing the public space. There is always all these interview and like all the respondents that we were talking about, when they have to access public space, it is always there is some male person from the family who will be accompanying them to okay, you want to go there, we will drop you, you hang out with your friend, and we'll be the ones who will going to take you back. I mean, all these things in the background is of course there. Yes, I mean, be it literate, be it high in HDI, but whether it is in terms of hair, or whether it is in terms of the beauty standards, or whether it is in terms of marriage, it's all very evidently there and there. Yeah.
Thanks. Sandhya, can we go to you? And
Yes. Yeah, so talking about relations among women, so these relations are very dynamic in nature, and most often these relations are shaped by their social locations, and caste is a very important factor to shaping these relations. I would like to give example as women from different caste backgrounds work in the bazaar. There is there are women who belong to Lamani or Banjara community. So they have very bad impression among women, and most of the time women label them as corrupt or thief women, and they do not allow them to come inside their shops or allow them to work with them. So these kind of discrimination happen or take place based on their social locations. Second thing, this discrimination also takes on the nature of work, because there are different sections in the vegetable market, and especially women do not have good good views towards women who work in the grain market, because these women basically wash toilets or bathrooms, and they look down these women, because these women do according to them filthy work or disgusting work. So these aspects works there, and about solidarity, women often give each other solidarity when the sexual harassment issue comes. So this is how the relations among women works in the market.
okay, thank you. Looks like time limits on panels are a necessity, but may we not have those time limits on our aspirations. On that note, coffee is waiting outside for us. The next panel is at 11:30. Yeah, thank you.